Ray Fittipaldo has seen the team in the interim at OTAs, at minicamp. Anybody who wants to can go see the Steelers practice tomorrow. A lot has changed since that terrible moment, that terrible game, the 299 rushing yards put up by the Baltimore Ravens. Will the changes pay off? Ray Fittipaldo joins us now from the Post-Gazette to discuss. Ray, brought to you by the Western PA injury attorneys of Larry Kelly and Joe George from LGKG, your home team. Ray, do we find you on Route 30?
Not quite yet, Adam. They will not let you on campus until 9 today, so trying to time it up. I should be on 30 in about half an hour or so.
Very good. We appreciate you multitasking. Please keep your attention as much as you can on the road, Ray. We need you to get there and report to us from training camp once a week. Ray, the Steelers have a ton of ifs, and Bill Cowher once famously said if you go into a season with a bunch of ifs, you're probably not going to be very good. So we spent the better part of the last hour trying to take some of those ifs and putting them into the category of positives by season's end and negatives by season's end. Let's start with Rodgers. He's a huge what if. He's 8 million years old. He didn't play all that well last year. Do you think he'll wind up being good for the team, or do you think he's going to go up in flames like he did last year?
No, I don't think he's going to go up in flames. I think he is, I don't want to say by far because he is 41 years old, but he's the best quarterback the Steelers have had since Ben Roethlisberger retired. I think that's worth something if he stays healthy. And the offensive line is going to be a huge part of that. Jaylen Warren and Caleb Johnson are going to be a huge part of that. But if they can keep him upright, I do think by season's end, and let's not even say 17, let's say he plays 14 to 15 games, I think the Steelers are going to be in contention for a playoff berth in the AFC if that happens.
All right, so another unknown, the offensive line, particularly the tackles positions, where Faltanu's basically a rookie and Broderick Jones is now finally where he belongs on the left side. So you say they got to keep Aaron Rodgers upright. Do you think those two guys in particular will?
Yeah, it's funny when you talk about the offensive line because they spent all of their draft resources, or their highest draft resources in recent years on the bookends. And I don't know about you, I go into the season feeling almost more comfortable or more certain about the centers and the guards. So, yeah, I mean, Broderick Jones is a huge unknown at this point. He didn't play well last year. He's moving to a new position. I know it's his old position, but he's moving to a new position. Then you have Troy Fautanu, who I think, if he can stay healthy, he's going to be fine, Adam. So, I think the tackles are really the offensive season is going to hinge on how those guys play. I'm not really worried about Fautanu, but I am a little bit interested to see how Broderick Jones responds from that bad season last year.
The Steelers ran the ball a ton last year, Ray, and they are fixing to do it again, I would guess. Will they be more effective running the ball with Jaylen Warren and now Caleb Johnson and Kenneth Gainwell?
Yeah, I think so. Jaylen Warren has been waiting for this opportunity. You can make the argument, Adam, that he should have had more touches and more carries the last couple of years.
For sure.
Najee Harris. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what he does. And, you're saying, can they be more effective? We've talked about this since they drafted Caleb Johnson. Caleb Johnson is a really good fit for Arthur Smith's offense. And, Najee Harris was a good back, but he wasn't a good scheme fit. So, yeah, theoretically, the running game should be better, but you got to have the blocking. You can't have these guys being tackled 2 yards behind the line of scrimmage or, touch two yards behind the line of scrimmage, like we saw so often with Harris and Warren the last couple of years. So if they can get that cleaned up, yes, I do think the running game can and should be better.
Ray, will they acquire another wide receiver? They do have $25 million in cap space. And if they do not, assuming DK Metcalf leads them in target share, who do you think would be number 2 on the current roster?
I think among receivers and tight ends, or just receivers?
Oh, you're reading my mind, Ray.
Yeah, I will say Pat Freiermuth will be the number 2 target. And then after you get past Pat, I think you're probably looking at John Smith or Calvin Austin, 3-4, something in that range. But in terms of acquiring another guy, I do think you'll see training camp and maybe even a preseason game or two play out before they address that. Listen, if they're comfortable with Calvin Austin as the number 2, hey, let's say Roman Wilson's having a really good camp, you probably don't have to go out and get that guy. But the argument I would make is maybe you do have to get that guy sooner rather than later in case there's an injury. Because if there's an injury, they just become really, really thin at receiver, and you don't want to be in that position going into the season.
That's the same thing that happened last year. The Fan Morning Show is brought to you by Guardian Protection, your hometown home and business security company. Ray, let's flip it over to the defensive side. I think the biggest question there is, how are they going to use Jalen Ramsey, Darius Slay, and Joey Porter Jr.? I'm guessing that's one of the things you're most curious about seeing up camp.
Yeah, for sure. Jalen Ramsey, obviously all-pro outside corner. He's dabbled in the slot the last couple of years. He could certainly do that, and I think that's probably where he's going to start with the Steelers. Darius Slay has never played in the slot. Joey Porter doesn't really have the build, for that. He's 6'2". I think they want to keep him outside. So I think you'll see Ramsey start in the slot, but I also think you'll see him play outside, and I think you'll see him play some free safety as well. I mean, that's another position since they traded Minka that there's a big question mark there. Juan Thornhill, is a veteran. He started a lot of games in the NFL, but he might be at the end of his career, certainly at the end of his prime. And, there are some good safeties still in the open market. So that's, like receiver, that's another position that they possibly could address at some point here during training camp.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, Ray. They've been so aggressive this offseason, and really they've been aggressive under Omar Khan. Now you got $25 million to play with and a couple of holes on the roster. I'd be shocked, frankly, if they didn't add a wide receiver or add a safety. Ray Fittipaldo, he's on his way to training camp. He's joining us here on the Fan Morning Show. Ray, TJ Watt wants to move around. Do the Steelers move him around? Are they going to blitz more this year? Are we going to see a different scheme for the Steelers defense than the one they were running last year, where I thought they were really predictable?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. We've seen Omar Khan make drastic changes after the way last season ended. That's the personnel end of it. Now we have to see schematic changes because what they did last year, with the old personnel, but let's face it, a lot of that personnel is coming back. Your most important personnel, TJ Watt, is coming back, and they got to find ways to free him up. So I'm all for that. I think, I don't know if they're going to show us what they're going to do in the preseason games or even in these practices, guys, but once we get to the regular season, yes, they have to move TJ Watt around. They cannot continue to do what they did the last couple of seasons where he's really a sitting duck, and it's easy for offensive coordinators and quarterbacks to scheme into good plays against him.
Ray, did they do enough to address the defensive line this offseason? Obviously, they bring in Derek Harmon, and they get Y.A. Black, but I still look at the depth there, and I'm worried, and it's tough to count on a rookie to be great, even if that rookie's a first-round pick.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think it's going to take a couple of years to rebuild that defensive line. I think it's going to be like the offensive line. The expectation is next spring they're going to draft a quarterback in the first round, but those other picks I think are going to go to addressing the front seven again, and I think it's much needed, especially with Cam Hayward. Nearing the end at some point, you're going to have to find his replacement as well. So, I think they started to do that this offseason. You also get Y.A. Black in the middle rounds, fifth round. I think he's going to challenge for a spot in the rotation. After Hayward, Harmon, and Keanu Benton, I can't sit here and tell you, other than Y.A. Black because he's a draft pick, I cannot sit here and tell you, Adam, that there's another shoe-in to make the 53-man roster among the guys who are now on the 90-man roster. Maybe maybe Daniel Iguale because they signed him as a free agent.
Right.
But, Loudermilk, Leal, Lowry, all those guys. There's going to be a lot of competition, for those final spots in the rotation.
I know that any team in the NFL is going to have a big problem if one of their best players get hurt. But Cam Hayward is getting close to 40, and he was an all-pro last season. If he's healthy, I just will expect him to be great until he's not. But you're one Cam Hayward injury away, even if he misses 2 or 3 games, from, I think, being in a really awful spot on that line.
Well, look how bad it got when he was injured 2 years ago.
Yep.
It was just a disaster, up front for them.
And Ray, not to interrupt you, but when he was on the field last year, the yards per carry allowed was among the best in the NFL. With him off the field, it was among the worst in the NFL. He's that important.
Yeah, and how can you play a 36-year-old 80% of the snaps? You could do that when he's 27, 28, 29, but you got to start rotating guys in there. That's why I think, people aren't talking about it, but I think Black is going to have a role on this team. Obviously, he's got to prove it during camp, but that guy's a big body, 335 pounds. They're looking for big bodies who can help stop the run. So everybody's talking about Harmon, but I'm going to be keeping an eye on Black as well.
Ray, who are you most excited to talk to today? You don't know who's going to come in the front door, who's going to go in the back door, but if you had your druthers, who's the guy you most are looking forward to speaking with?
Yeah, I would probably, just because we haven't talked to him yet, Jalen Ramsey. Maybe John Smith, but Jalen Ramsey, we keep hearing that the Steelers like his versatility, but I want to hear him talk about possibly moving to free safety. He hasn't done it a lot, but a lot of guys like him in the past have kind of made second careers out of going to safety eventually. So I think we'll get a pretty good feel for how he feels about it today. And, yeah, he's one guy, hopefully, who stops on the hill and talks to us.
Ray, I love that we're going to have things to react to the next time we speak on Wednesday, buddy. Enjoy your time up camp, and we will talk to you then. Be safe.
Thanks, Adam. See you.
See you, buddy.